Trevor, welcome to Inside GITEX podcast. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to be in the air-conditioned part of the conference.
It's pretty hot out there and it's very, very busy. How do you feel about being amongst thousands at GITEX?
Yeah, it's great. It's good energy. Definitely overwhelming, I would say. I've never seen so many really elaborate exhibitor booths in one place.
Yeah.
But it's really cool.
And it's your first GITEX, right?
First GITEX, not first time in Dubai though. Love Dubai. Try and visit at least once a year. But GITEX is definitely a different level. So.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you come a long way. And you just arrived, literally, what, 4 hours ago? You got off the plane?
Yep, got in 4 hours ago.
From San Francisco?
Yes, so that was like a 15 plus hour flight.
How are you feeling?
My superpower is I can sleep anywhere, except for this podcast.
Yeah, good man, huh? You knew what was coming next.
I know, yeah, sixth sense. But yeah, no, I think the energy is infectious. So.
You are the founder of Mammoth Biosciences. Talk to me about Mammoth. What do you guys do? What are you all about?
Yeah, so the basic premise of the company is how do we cure all genetic diseases, whether that's a genetic disease of the brain, of muscle, of the heart, whatever it is. How do we live in a world where your genetics don't determine your future?
That's a pretty big mission.
Yeah, we have our work cut out for us.
How did you get into this?
This is my first job. I did a PhD in biology before helping to co-found the company, along with Jennifer Doudna, who's a professor at Berkeley that actually won the Nobel Prize for inventing the technology we work with called CRISPR. That's how we actually cure genetic diseases. And
what does it stand for?
Yeah, that's a fun one. So it stands for...
sounds great, by the way, doesn't it?
Clustered Regulatory Interspace Short Palindromic Repeats.
It just sounds better with CRISPR. Let's stick to
so
CRISPR.
you can see why we call it CRISPR.
Yeah.
Say that 10 times fast.
So what does it actually mean? Break it down to in layman's terms. So someone who's not involved in, gene editing or biosciences.
So imagine your genome as a Word document. It basically has 2 billion letters. And in many ways, it's actually a simple document. It's all 4 letters. It's A, T, C, and G. And when you have a genetic disease, the basic problem is that it could just be a single letter of those billions that's wrong. And that means that, kind of infuriatingly, you could cure that disease by just switching sometimes a single letter. Some diseases can be more complicated. To abuse the metaphor, sometimes you're missing a whole paragraph of the book, or sometimes something's bolded when it should be italicized. So there's different types of edits that you might need to do. But fundamentally, you're basically trying to correct the words in that giant Word document.
Is that what makes you different from everyone else in terms of the CRISPR approach?
Yeah, so in terms of what we do that's special in the CRISPR field is a couple of things. One of them is that we invented these really, really tiny versions of CRISPR that can actually be delivered anywhere in the body. One of the big limitations of the field was that people could only do things outside of the body, so like editing cells that are taken out, which really only works for things like the blood, where you can actually take it out. You can't really take your brain out and do stuff and put it back in. You wouldn't like that. And in general... when we think about CRISPR or proteins, they're obviously all small relative to us, right? You could fit 1 million of them on your hand. But when you zoom down to the size of cells, the original CRISPR proteins were actually kind of like tractor trailers that you couldn't really drive down a city street. So we invented essentially the smart car versions of CRISPR that could go anywhere. And that was really transformative in terms of
so could you give me an example of
anywhere in the body.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so for example, if you want to go to like muscle or brain, there's certain delivery systems called AAV. Stands for adeno-associated virus. Before you ask.
I knew that, of course, naturally.
Yeah, just so you know, I know. And basically, these, you can think of them as a truck that only has a certain cargo capacity. And the original CRISPR systems just couldn't fit. So it was very difficult to use them. But our kind of ultra-compact versions of these systems don't just fit, but they have tons of room to spare. So it makes it a very effective delivery method. So for the first time, you can really effectively deliver the CRISPR technology that can do these amazing changes to the DNA to all these different tissues like muscle and like brain, where many of the diseases that you probably think of when you think of genetic disease are located, like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS.
So it's not a one size fits all. It's basically different parts of the body need different delivery points for different things.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 dominant ways to deliver in the body right now. One of them is called LNP, or lipid nanoparticle, and that works really well for the liver and maybe a couple other cell types. And the other one's called AAV that we just talked about, and that one is really good at some of the key ones, like brain and muscle and other tissues like that. So once you're able to cover those two, you're covering most of the body.
Okay.
And the exciting thing is that now we've shown that we can very effectively use both of those delivery methods.
So bring it down to the rest of us who are not working in biosciences. Give me some sort of accessible understanding or applications of how your technology is being applied in non-bioscience related industries, whether it's healthcare, agriculture.
Yeah, exactly. So, the lead program we're working on, which will be going into the clinics, going into humans next year, is for high triglycerides. So many of us actually have high triglycerides just from our diet. And that's actually how we model high triglycerides in animals like mice, is we feed them what we call a Western diet.
Why is it always mice, by the way?
Just convenient, accident of history.
Yeah. Is it low cost as well, potentially?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, history selected it for certain reasons. We can put a bunch of them in a facility, but in general, they have their limitations. For example, when it comes to gene editing, non-human primates are seen as much more indicative of human biology than a mouse, for example.
Makes much more sense.
But for our lead program for these high triglycerides, the idea is that the patient would go into the doctor's office, they would get a shot in their arm, and then over the course of, basically the next couple of weeks, not long, that technology is delivered to cells in their liver, and it edits the DNA in those cells. And in this case, it basically deletes a sentence from that giant Word document. It deletes one gene, turns it off. And by doing that, no matter kind of what their diet is or lifestyle or things like that, they have low triglycerides, which is amazing. And you can imagine that you will start with patients that have extraordinarily high triglycerides, just really suffering from things like pancreatitis. But what's really exciting is you can imagine a future where actually maybe even everyone gets this. And just imagine how many millions of lives you could save from just everyone having low triglycerides.
Yes.
And this extends beyond that, I think, more generally to what you're mentioning of, even beyond biotech of like, okay, what are the exciting things you could do with genetic editing more broadly? Well, in agriculture, what if you could have crops that are tastier or grow in more harsh environments? Or even going back to humans, what if you and I could only sleep for 3 hours a night but feel fully refreshed? Or what if you could grow muscle without going to the gym?
That would be nice.
There's many things you can imagine that, in a sense, they do sound sci-fi because they are, but they've never been closer to our grasp.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to come back to the ethical side in a second. But before I do, actually, let's talk about ethics now, because that's one big controversial topic, if you like, around gene editing. What is your view, and how is Mammoth sort of approaching the ethical point of view?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple layers to it. The first one that's important to mention is that there's broadly two types of editing you could do. One is called somatic, and that's what we and pretty much all others in the space do. And that's where you're editing cells in the body that are not passed on to your kids. And the other is called germline. And it's called germline because it means that the sperm or the egg will be edited, so that will be inherited. And I think when it comes to somatic, I personally don't see any ethical qualm because it's your choice to get the therapy. You will not pass, for better or for worse, you will not pass that genetic edit down to your progeny. I think for many diseases, you might be like, oh my God, like maybe we should, like Huntington's, there's horrible genetic diseases where you probably don't want a child to have it. But we and all others stick to somatic editing. And I think the more controversial one is the germline editing. So that's where you're kind of bending the arc of human evolution potentially through things other than natural selection.
So what are you doing in that? Are you avoiding it, or are you looking at it?
Yeah, so we don't do any germline editing because I think from our perspective, there are so many thousands of diseases that can be cured somatically. We've got our work cut out for us.
And you start playing God for all better extents and purposes, right? That's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think in general, society is not a company. Like, society needs to figure out which direction we want to go, and maybe different governments will decide different things. But we really just focus on the somatic editing.
Isn't what you're doing at Mammoth a big threat to the big farmers?
It's an interesting question. We actually work with many biotech and pharma companies.
Because if you're being able to basically eradicate at source potential issues, you're gonna, patients are gonna avoid thousands of dollars worth of continued treatment.
Yeah, I think the lesson of healthcare is no matter how many diseases you treat or cure, there's always new things that crop up. But it is, to your point, a very different way of thinking about healthcare. Like, a common phrase is that we currently have sick care, right? You come in with symptoms, like we can usually just treat the symptoms. We're not really curing the disease for you. And this is the first time we've really been able to say with a straight face, actually, you're going to come in, you're going to get a single shot, you're going to go home, and within a few weeks, you will live the rest of your life without that disease. And for the diseases like sickle cell that already have patients that have been treated with this and potentially cured, it's amazing to listen to their stories because they'll tell these stories like, I only knew myself as a patient with sickle disease. I knew myself as someone that had sickle cell disease. Yeah. So it's like now that I don't have it, like I don't even know who I am anymore. Yeah. Like I can go on a plane. I don't have pain attacks. Yeah. So I think it's a very different way, A, of thinking about the healthcare system just from first principles, and to your point, B, of paying for things. That's the other part of this that the healthcare system is not really set up for, is the healthcare system would rather pay $20 million over the course of the patient's life dealing with the symptoms than pay $5 million once to potentially cure it. And we can argue, the prices of those things, but that's the system.
Yeah. So are you going to impact their bottom line? I mean, if your business goes well, it should, in theory.
I want to live in a world where we don't have any genetic disease. And actually what we're talking about is the price of building muscle without having to go to the gym. And I think that's actually a really interesting point. Because one thing that I didn't even fully appreciate this until I looked up the data. But if you look at, we all know OpenAI, right? Amazing company, great revenue, it's a rocket ship. You know what outscaled OpenAI ChatGPT revenue? Eli Lilly's obesity drugs. People don't realize that. If you build a medicine or a drug or a permanent cure that can actually tackle common diseases, that is $1 trillion company waiting to be built. And at Mammoth, we think very deeply about, okay, what are the things we can go after that actually are, have the potential over time to be truly mass market? Like they could actually, have that level of impact. So I think the lesson there is that there are gigantic biotech markets that are untapped, where if we cured every genetic disease out there, thank God we could focus on that stuff.
Yeah. So Trevor, here's an elephant in the room. How come cancer hasn't been cured?
So I think that's actually a great one to bring up, because cancer is inherently a genetic disease. We get cancer because something goes wrong in the genetic machinery of the cells, and then they proliferate and basically outcompete our normal cells. So there's a lot of very exciting work going on, both CRISPR-related and CRISPR-adjacent, things like in vivo CAR T, to address cancer with exciting new genetic techniques. One of the reasons why that's really difficult, well, it's two reasons. So one is delivering to the cancer cells that actually need the genetic edit is really hard. They create these, what we call tumor microenvironments, that kind of have like a little shields up around them. So it's really tough to deliver into them. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out how do you penetrate that and actually get into the cells so you can fix the genetics that have gone wrong. And then two, every cancer is unique in a way, right? We're all basically have unique genetic mutations. So we need to get better at what we call precision medicine, or creating quickly customized therapies. And a lot of this is a regulatory question. Because from a technology perspective, we can actually do these things pretty well. But what's the regulatory regime that allows you to quickly say, I've sequenced you for this cancer, we figured out the particular delivery method, and I can spin up a new CRISPR-based solution for you within months. And how do I get that to you in an ethical way? I think that's the challenge.
And in a financially affordable way.
Yeah, and then on top of that, figure out how to
because that's the other elephant in the room is all of this is very, very expensive, I'm guessing.
Well, I think it's very cheap relative to the standard of care. How many trillions of dollars are spent in oncology with, sometimes, unfortunately, very little extension of the patient's life. Now, imagine if you could spend even just that same amount, but actually put the patients into complete remission. That would be a huge win. So I think this gets back to the idea of, I think the healthcare system is designed to pay $20 million over 20 years rather than pay $5 million today. And, it's short-term wise, long-term foolish. Yeah. And it requires, I think some countries are better set up for than others. For example, when you have centralized healthcare systems where you have the same payer for the entire life of the patient, I think they can be more willing to take those types of bets versus systems where maybe they're changing insurers every 3 years. Yeah. The good news is that these therapies can be designed even in a system where you're only on a payer for 3 years to make financial sense, even on that timeline, which is really amazing for some diseases. But unfortunately, for other diseases, even just the manufacturing is complex enough that it's going to be more expensive.
So what are you working on right now? What are the challenges you're trying to fix?
Yeah, so a big focus for us right now is bringing our lead program for this triglyceride disease into humans. So we're really excited about that. So that's a lot of manufacturing. Like how do you actually put this into a form that can be delivered to patients safely and effectively? It's a lot of looking at regulatory interactions, like looking at what are the actual clinical trial sites where you're going to find the patients.
Yep.
It's all very exciting because it's something that started literally in the lab, like brand new science, all the way to something where you can look at this is the drug that's going to be delivered. I think I underappreciated how amazing that journey is.
I love your passion.
Yeah.
We've been talking for about 10 minutes and we haven't mentioned 2 letters, AI. How come? How involved is AI in your business, and how involved will it be in your business, if not already?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Actually, when I was a grad student, I was a statistician, so I trained in both the biology and statistics.
I'm not shocked by that, Trevor.
And statistics department. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. And I think that it's always been a huge part of how we've developed the CRISPR technologies. I mean, to be frank, 5 years ago, we called it machine learning. And there have been really exciting new techniques like generative AI and these like large language models where you can actually feed these giant data sets that we've developed now at Mammoth of all these different types of CRISPR technologies. And you can say, hey, I want a CRISPR system that has like these properties. Give me some examples. And then we have a whole floor of our building has these high throughput liquid handling robots that just run like thousands of experiments at a time. And so we can loop that back in and say, okay, well, these worked and these didn't, and the model can improve. And I think that every year, basically, that's getting better, where I think generative AI was a jump there for sure. But even from the beginning of the company 7-8 years ago, we've been using the latest machine learning techniques, and those are only accelerating. There's no way around it. So that's on the research side, and that's in our DNA. No pun intended. Is that we've really been leveraging the combination of generative AI with wet lab feedback, similar to how for the chatbots, like basically people rate, was this a good response or a bad response? We let liquid handling robots say, was this a good molecule or a bad molecule? So that maybe is the more obvious part that people talk about a lot. I think the second part that I'm really excited about is on the clinical trial side. Because if you look at the development of a drug, you spend, I don't know, even generously, let's say 50 million, that's a lot, like on the preclinical work, let's say, developing that molecule. And then on the back end, you spend $800 million taking it through the clinical trial.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is paperwork and finding patients and just
do you need the clinical trials if you've got quantum computing?
You will still need the clinical trials with quantum computing.
Okay.
I have a lot of thoughts about that as well. Happy to comment on that separate podcast. But I think in general, AI has both an immense ability to transform the research side, but also an immense ability to transform the clinical trial side. And that will be huge because that is the vast majority of the cost and the time of molecules.
So let's talk about the future then. Crystal ball moment. What's the next 5 to 10 years look like in the gene editing space?
So I think the exciting thing I can say with a straight face is that for example, liver genetic disease, in the next 10 years, there's no reason why anyone has to die of that. I think for any liver genetic disease, we will be able to
across the globe or isolated to certain parts of society?
Well, I think access is a very interesting question. The technology will be there. I hope everyone has access to it.
Yeah.
And I think there's pathways to that. But I think that, excitingly, that will be our challenge.
Yeah.
The technology will exist. Many people
just
have
how to get it to market and how to mass
and
produce.
How do we make sure that everyone on earth, no matter where they're from, can get access to it?
In this part of the world, we say inshallah. So inshallah, that will be accessible to everybody.
Yes, exactly.
Couple of closing questions. What would be your closing insight when it comes to this industry? What do people need to know?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really exciting to me is that we are rapidly moving from a world where it was more difficult to manipulate the genome than it was to kind of understand what to manipulate. We already knew for, honestly, decades now, thousands of genetic diseases, exactly what caused it. We just couldn't do anything about it. Huntington's being a great example. But now we pretty much live in a world where we are extremely good at manipulating the genome in many ways. And we kind of know the work ahead of us, and we have a ton of work to do on thousands of diseases. It's going to take a ton of time and effort. But we kind of, the path is there. We can crank down. First of all, that's amazing. And we should double, triple, quadruple down on that. In addition, now, actually, one of the tricky things is for many diseases, we don't know what, like schizophrenia. We know it's genetic. If your parents had schizophrenia, you're way more likely to have it. But we don't know necessarily what to change in your DNA to cure it. right? So I think that's another area AI can have a huge impact, is trying to kind of deconvolute that side of things, so that as we're cranking through the thousands of genetic diseases that we know exactly what causes it, what about the tens of thousands of diseases where we're still kind of trying to figure it out?
Just a spin-off question. How do you prioritize which ones to tackle first?
Some of the main unmet need, so people literally dying from it, and the applicability to like actually multiple diseases. There's some genes you can look at where if you can actually fix it, you can actually go
code,
across multiple,
nice.
even a dozen diseases.
It's a sweet
or something.
spot. Very cool.
Exactly.
And finally, expectations for the remainder of GITEX. What are you hoping to get out of it?
Hoping to be able to find my way to different booths. But yeah, no, I think the thing I do like about forum like GITEX is that it really is this like confluence of different fields. And I'm a big believer that, in my opinion, the vast majority, let's say, of scientific progress comes from different fields clashing into each other. And I think this is a great forum for that type of like serendipity and creativity. Yeah. So I hope for a lot of that here.
And it's been a clash, me and you coming together as well. Look, it's been great having you, Trevor. Thank you for being a part of the Inside GITEX podcast. And I wish you all the very best from the behalf of planet Earth. We need more people like you helping us get better. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.